Welcome back to our Crisis in the Classroom Town Hall final exam for our panel focusing on Massachusetts schools and the education landscape in the Commonwealth. I am joined today by Edward Lambert, Executive Director of the Massachusetts Business Alliance for Education, Andrew O'Leary, New Bedford School Superintendent, and Max Page, the President of the Massachusetts Teachers Association. How are you all doing today?
Terrific. Great to be here.
Wonderful. We are going to start off with the big story in Massachusetts this year, which is that there is no longer a requirement to graduate to take the MCAS. The MCAS requirement is no longer. You know, you all have mixed opinions on that. Ed, we'll start with you. What do you feel about that requirement being dropped?
Well, we certainly, our organization, which represents business leaders across the Commonwealth for better than 30 years, has supported that requirement really as a way to have high standards for all students. And so we were disappointed with the vote. But nonetheless, we think there are some opportunities to work with educators, with business leaders, with parents and families going forward to craft an even better standard. We believe in high expectations for all students. We think that a new standard should include that. Those standards should be not only academic, but can be in other areas as well, and that we can find some other ways to routinely and commonly assess whether or not a student is ready for college and career. So we'll move forward. We understand and respect and accept the decision of voters. And let's see if we can come up with a better system. But
Max, I understand the Teachers Association was supportive of this requirement being taken down. Talk about where you stand now on the issue.
Sure. So yes, this is a top priority for our members. We represent 117,000 public school and college educators all across Massachusetts, and this has been a very high priority for many years. And as Ed said, the voters overwhelmingly, almost 60-40, and voted for this. And what I think where we agree is that this has opened up a real conversation. What is it that we want from a graduate in Massachusetts, and how do we assess it? What are the kinds of things that we want to support? So I think there's a real opportunity now, and we're busy with listening sessions, and the council's working, and so it's actually exactly what we hoped. So for us, it was getting rid of the harm of the high stakes test, and then opening up a conversation about what comes next.
Absolutely. And Andrew, being in schools and seeing, you know, what the MCAS looks like in New Bedford, what is your feeling about all of this?
Well, we didn't, or at least I didn't take a position on the MCAS. I felt there were bigger issues in education. Our statement at the time was that this wasn't the biggest barrier that students were facing in school. And we also felt that this wasn't the biggest guarantor of rigor, which is very important in schools' high standards. So there are other ways to maintain high standards. We do maintain high standards within New Bedford Public Schools. Our graduation rate has risen. Performance on MCAS has risen, and MCAS as a performance measure isn't going away. But as a graduation requirement, there are other barriers to graduation which we try and overcome for students all the time.
The state has decided there is a new competency determination. And, you know, what are your thoughts on what that means right now? Is that enough, you think?
well, we've been pretty critical of the vote that the board recently took to have these interim standards. We don't think they're sufficient. They allow different districts to decide what achieving mastery means. One community has decided that D- is good enough. And so we think that the state could have done more in the interim to tie standards to the coursework that they're going to require of students. I think this is the problem, and this is where there was some disagreement with proponents of the question. We believe that the system can always be improved. We did not have a perfect system, but throwing that system out and then working to create a new one could take quite some time. We're very concerned about what's going to happen in the interim. We don't think the state has done enough to preserve and protect high standards for all students currently, and that's why we hope there's some urgency to those points that we can agree on, that there are ways in which we can improve the system, measure through a common assessment, student academic performance, make sure that all students are prepared, but look at some other new ways in which we can evaluate students' readiness for postgraduate success.
Max, I know that decision also used limited MCAS use, and the Teachers Association wasn't so excited that the MCAS would still be considered in that way. Talk about what you think about the CD requirement.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a lot of problems with this initial effort, and including the fact that they want to still use the MCAS for a limited number of situations. Look, we didn't want to go to the ballot. We spent 10 years advocating for the kind of long-term commission that would really look at this. In the end, parents, educators, students said enough. We need to rip the Band-Aid off, stop the harm of the high-stakes test, and open up the conversation that we're having now. And one of the things that I think gives us a lot of confidence is that we actually have very rigorous standards that apply to every single district in every academic field. And so there's actually, and we also have the finest educators in the nation. So I'm not worried, as some have said, like that there's sort of a, falling off a cliff. Quite the opposite. I think it's actually freed up our educators and our students. And now we dig into what is it exactly we need to support to have a well-rounded, rigorous high school education.
We're going to shut it down and shut it down as quickly as possible. It's doing us no good.
To me, this is really distressing. I think it's a dumb idea. It seems to me we should be doing everything we can to make America more competitive, continue to invest in education, and I can tell you as governor, I'm going to continue to support and invest in education in our state.
Shifting gears now to the federal Department of Education. We know there are a lot of changes happening federally, and that will likely impact local districts. Where do you all stand on what we're seeing, across the country?
Personally, I don't think there's a plan from the current U.S. Department of Education. It's much of a mess. And without speaking to whether or not we should have the bureaucracy, there are a lot of functions that federal Department of Education provides that teachers, business leaders, parents, and others are concerned are going to go away. Of course, you can always find efficiencies in bureaucracies, but the idea that we're just going to blow it up, or even worse, that we're going to attack educational institutions is very disconcerting, particularly for business leaders. When you look at the state of Massachusetts, how dependent are we on the research dollars that go into some of these institutions? The international students who come here and stay and really make our economy vibrant. And so I believe the other panelists here would agree, but it's an absolute disaster in terms of what we've seen thus far with regard to the federal lack of commitment and, quite honestly, performative disruption is, I guess, a word I will use with regard to education in this country.
Yeah, and we've seen it firsthand in New Bedford schools. Some of our COVID relief dollars, emergency ESSER dollars, which had been granted an extension previously. This happened to other districts and to other projects in the state of Massachusetts as well. There had been what was called a clawback. That had been blocked by the courts. It's called the action arbitrary and capricious. And I think that's a good term for what's been happening since January with the U.S. Department of Education, these arbitrary and capricious actions. And when you consider that the U.S. Department of Education has been a partner since the 80s with districts, especially districts like New Bedford, around serving Title I schools, around serving programs for students with disabilities, the U.S. Department of Education serves as a strong partner and serves as a guarantor, actually, of individual rights. There's a lot of talk about parental rights, but actually you'll see a track record of the U.S. Department of Education and the Civil Rights Division within the U.S. Department of Education advocating on behalf of students and families and being there for students and families. So those programs and those supports have been in our backyard all along, and I think we're starting to realize now that when those go away, we're going to start seeing that gap. So it should be pushed back on forcefully. I appreciate the Attorney General, the Secretary of Education, and the Governor pushing back forcefully on these things, and I think we need to continue that. We need a strong U.S. Department of Education.
I agree fully. I'll be even more blunt. I mean, an authoritarian regime is unfortunate. I think we are facing, and we've seen this throughout history, go after public education, pre-K through higher ed, because that's, frankly, these are the foundations of democracy. So we're very, very concerned, and in Massachusetts especially, with the finest public education system as well, we have to defend that. So I think we have to work very hard on fighting the budget, but also the attacks on civil rights, on DEI, on all kinds of things that are under real attack right now. So I think it's a very frightening moment, but I also think there's such strong support for public education in Massachusetts and frankly across the country, even in red states, that I'm hopeful that we build a very strong counter movement and remind people why we have built this great public education system over the past 150 years.
Thank you so much for sharing your concerns and also your hopes for the future of the state of Massachusetts and the education landscape as we see it now. And thank you all so much for participating today.
Thank you.
So much.
Good to be here. Thank you.